The first video for Unit 11 is on nation states. And what we're going to talk about is how monarchs sort of unify power and centralize their governments and create nations out of this. England, France, Spain, to be, in particular, Germany. They're all going to be created during this time period. So we're going to focus on them. We'll also talk a little bit at the end about how medieval scholars kept alive many of the ideas of the Greeks and Romans. It was really the only place where education was alive in medieval Europe. That's it for this unit. Hope you enjoy.
Okay, this is Unit 11, Part 1. We're going to be talking about nation states. Okay, the student will demonstrate a knowledge of describing how the countries of England, France, Spain, and Russia all became distinctive political units, and go from there. All right, we'll also just briefly touch on the preservation and transfer to Western Europe of Greek, Roman, and Arabic philosophy, medicine, and science, mostly through the works of monks. Okay, so what are nation states? European monarchs consolidated their power and began forming nation states in the late medieval period, especially after the Crusades, when the church lost a great deal of its power. And so we'll talk more about that as we get to the Crusades. So European nation states or countries will start to expand their territories under these powerful monarchs. So what are the traits of a nation state? Okay, the characteristics are defined territory. They have a set of land that you know it's there, borders, and they have defined those and they protect those. They have a strong central government, and in the case of the nation states that we're going to be talking about, while they do have some representative governments, they're mostly controlled by very powerful monarchs. And they have common culture. Usually language and religion are very, very similar within their borders. So those are things that they have in common which allow them to bond together. Okay, so the first nation state that we're going to talk about is England. And England is going to be unified for the most part under a ruler known as William the Conqueror, also called William of Normandy or Duke William. He will defeat Harold of Wessex in what is now a very famous battle in 1066 called the Battle of Hastings. We'll watch a really cool video to sort of ingrain that in your head later on. This is William, Duke William. And remember, Normandy was located on the coast of France across the English Channel, and William brought his troops in and took over. Okay, another important development during the late Middle Ages for England is common law, and it has its beginnings during the reign of a ruler known as Henry II. Common law is the idea that you should write down all of the aspects of a court case, all the testimony, all the facts, and then use that court case to make decisions later on cases that have similar facts and circumstances. This is common law. It's also the idea that the law can be living and changed, but it's going to play a huge, huge influence on our legal system from those same things that I just described, especially the idea of coming back and talking about precedent, the idea that things were already decided and you use those same decisions later on. Okay, so King John is going to play a huge role by the signing of the Magna Carta. The Great Charter, as it's known, was forced upon King John when he tried to get his barons to support war effort, and they refused unless he gave them some rights. And so this document is going to play a role in not only giving those nobles rights, but later on pretty much everyone in Europe will have rights based on the ideas of the Magna Carta. Probably the most significant thing is that it limits the power of the king and reduces the power of the king. Now, the irony of the whole thing is that King John pretty much ignored it and did his own thing anyhow. But it was things like they had to be told what they were charged with, and they got to be tried by a jury of their peers. Those types of things. Basic rights. Okay, so the 100 Years' War is going to be huge for England and France, and it's going to help define England as a nation. And we're going to talk a lot more about the 100 Years' War in class, but basically what happens is there's a dispute as to who will be the king of France. And the king at the time for England, King Edward, thinks that he should be the king of France. And so the minute that he does this, of course, it starts a huge war between the two countries that's known as the 100 Years' War. It actually lasts 115 years, but, I guess it wasn't cool to call it the 115 Years' War. But the big thing that comes out of this is that it will limit, it'll eliminate some of the feudal ties that had existed between many of the nobles and the commoners and those types of things. It will reduce the power of the nobility and increase the power of the king in both France and England. Okay, and from this time period as well, England will start to develop their parliament. It starts out as the Great Council of Nobles from the Magna Carta, and then it will evolve into the representative body that we know as Parliament. And we'll talk more about that in class as well. Okay, so what about Henry VII? Henry VII is a famous king who wins the War of the Roses between the Stuarts and the Tudor family. And he is a member of the Tudor family, and we'll talk more about the war, of course, in class 2. But the main thing you need to know is the Tudors become the ruling family of England, and he will establish power. And then you're going to find out about Henry VIII and all those other guys in World 2, and so some of the dilemmas they go through. Okay, so now, on your notes, what I'd like you to do is create a theory as to why the Magna Carta was so important to every citizen of medieval Europe, and then talk about how common law is related to our own legal system, and if you would do that right here, I would really appreciate it. Okay, so what about France? France is sort of a history of not having very strong kings after Charlemagne, until a guy named Hugh Capet establishes the Capetian kings. And he will establish the French throne in Paris and gradually expand the Capetian rule over all of what we know as France today. Now, that power of the French monarch is going to be further increased by Philip II and Philip IV. And they will also, not only emerge as a strong government, but they'll be strong allies of the church, and at times actually stand up to the church. And when I'm talking about the church here, I'm referring to the Catholic Church. Finally, Charles VII will be the first king to establish a permanent army and taxation. And then you get Louis XI, who, of course, expanded the nation to its current borders, or close to that. Now, the 100 Years' War, as I said before, is when the King of England tries to claim the French throne. This is a huge war in sort of establishing France as a powerful nation. They will defeat England after 115 years. And one of the things that this war does is it establishes the French monarch as a power player. Now, they probably never win the war without Joan of Arc, the young teenage girl who will actually sort of motivate them to victory at one of their major wins at Orleans. And we'll talk a lot more about Joan and the 100 Years' War with some of our projects that we do in class. Okay, so how about Spain? Spain was controlled by several smaller kingdoms and mostly by Muslims at this point. It was pretty multicultural. And then Ferdinand and Isabella, who were Catholic rulers, came in and sort of unified the country by bringing together the kingdoms of Aragon and Castile. And so one of the things they do is they expel all the Jews and Moors. All non-Catholics are kicked out of Spain. And this religious unity will be created by what they call the Reconquista, where they reestablish Catholicism as the primary religion of Spain, and the Inquisition, because anyone who was not a Christian would be tortured until they admitted so and then executed. Now, this is not the first time that the Inquisition happens. It was started by a saint named Saint Dominic, who went all through Europe doing this, and later on, the Spanish Inquisition will do sort of similar tactics to expel non-Catholics. And this will have a tremendous impact on their economy at first. Now, Ferdinand and Isabella sponsor Columbus and his trips to America in 1492. But it is under Charles V that the Spanish Empire will be established in the Western Hemisphere. And as you can see, they control vast amounts of territory in both North and South America. Okay, so what about Russia? Ivan I of Russia is the first ruler to enlarge the kingdom and establish Moscow as his primary base. Ivan III, also known as Ivan the Great, will be the ruler who frees Russia from Mongol control under Batu Khan, the grandson of the great Genghis Khan, who we'll talk about later in this unit. And then Ivan IV, also known as Ivan the Terrible, or Ivan Vasilievich, may have been the greatest ruler of the Russian period. He codified the law and he centralized power in Moscow. He also expanded the Russian nation and sort of unified everyone. Now, he did go cuckoo for Cocoa Puffs after his wife died and, did some horrible things, which we talked about back in Unit 6. But he did play a major role in establishing the country and expanding its borders. Now, the unification of Russia probably never happens if he doesn't centralize power in his hands, the Tsar or Caesar. Because remember, he saw Russia as the third Rome. Now, the Orthodox Church also played a huge role in this. And remember, that came from the Byzantine Empire. And so the Orthodox Church certainly influenced the unification of Russia. Okay. So on your chart, I want you to fill in this info about Russia, Spain, and France, including writing down some of their key leaders, the impact of the country, and the religions that existed in those nation states. Remember, you can pause the video, you can go back, and figure this stuff out. Okay, so what were the representative bodies in Europe? In England, it was Parliament. In Spain, it was called the Cortes. This is a picture of the Cortes. And in France, it was called the Estates General. Now remember, the Estates General actually had 3 estates. One was made up of the nobles, one was made up of priests, and one actually allowed common people who were merchants and landowners to make decisions as well. Although their real power was still held by the king, and he often dissolved the Estates General at different times. Okay, so please write down what the representative governments were of each of those nation states in Europe. Okay, our last topic is about the church scholars. And remember that education was primarily confined to the monasteries during the Middle Ages. Only the clergy and a very few handful of people could actually read and write. And if you did, you usually worked in a monastery translating Greek and Arabic works into Latin. These illuminated manuscripts or decorated books are the only way we kept alive the ideas of the Greeks and the Arab philosophers and their ideas of medicine and science. It's the only way they were available in Europe. And in a lot of cases, the church squashed this information from coming out. So that also played a role from the church. But these church scholars laid the foundation for the rise of universities all throughout Europe. And remember that a lot of the universities were very church-based at first. Okay? So without the work of these great scholars, probably many of the ideas would have never survived. What are the big ideas of this video? First, European monarchs consolidated power and began forming nation-states in the late medieval period. Education was largely confined to the clergy during the Middle Ages, and the masses were uneducated. Nobility was more concerned with feudal obligations than education. And church scholars preserved ancient literature in the monasteries in the East and the West. Okay, I hope you enjoyed the video.